Okay, so I'm going to talk about a subject that I've covered here before, and it's not a subject I particularly want to talk about, to be quite honest. But when I set out to make this channel, I knew I would be covering topical issues, and I would be speaking about subjects that I felt needed to be talked about. It's not necessarily that I enjoy talking about all of these subjects, but my channel covers topical news items, and this could not be more topical. Um, so the reality of Islamist terrorism is going to be the theme of this video. And in recent weeks, it's become really quite overwhelming. Um, it has to be stressed that there are still far more people die, for example, in road accidents than in terrorism. That has to be, shouldn't sort of fall in on it, go crazy with fear or something like that. Absolutely, we need to put that in context. But it's irrefutable that over the past few weeks, months, let's say over the past 2 years, roughly speaking, there has been a surge of terrorism, or a period of terrorism, is perhaps a better way to put it, in Western Europe that is unparalleled in history, really. Not on this sort of scale. Beginning with the Charlie Hebdo attack, and there's origins before that with threats against Danish cartoonists and so on, but the Charlie Hebdo attack, the Paris attacks, then to this year the Brussels attacks, the Nice attack, and now it's spread to Germany. Würzburg, Ansbach. It is important that we look at each case and we look at the details of each case. Because what happened in Munich, for example, everyone rushed to judgment, thought it's another Islamist attack, which is understandable given the current environment. That turned out to be a spree killing. So it is important to a spree killing without Islamist connections, without, the guy was a German Iranian, but he had no alleged ties to ISIS, so that was that. Still a tragedy, still a big story, but similar to what happened in Japan, that had no ISIS connection. But that shouldn't distract from the fact that there is a reality going on here. Now, what I find intolerable is that whenever these atrocities happen, in fact, Rouen yesterday, I didn't even mention Rouen. That's how frequently these things are occurring. How much more sadistic can you get than decapitating an 86-year-old defenseless old man in a church? I think that in those situations, a shoot to kill policy is the only policy. You cannot negotiate with that sort of savagery in those specific situations. I just want to talk relatively briefly. I don't intend to make this video extremely long, but I am so tired whenever these atrocities occur of seeing the same old nonsense that's got nothing to do with religion. I'm focusing in this video on the attacks in Europe because I'm a European and obviously I care what's happening here, and I think it's only a matter of time before something happens in Britain. To be quite honest, I think Brexit isn't going to make a great deal of difference in terms of the security situation. I think that, I'm focusing on Europe, but look at what happened in Dhaka. When the attackers went into that restaurant, they specifically said that they would kill those who couldn't recite verses from the Quran. Now, each case is not exactly the same, but there is consistencies. Shouts of Allahu Akbar, and a perception of killing non-Muslims. The terrorists differ somewhat in the exact route that they have taken into Islamism, but it's irrefutable that it is there. Now, people will say, oh, but they can't be real Muslims because they drink and they womanize and all the rest of it. If you actually break this down, the insinuation is this. You know, those who say you cannot generalize all Muslims as terrorists, firstly, very, very few people actually do that. You will get a few neo-nationalistic figures who will come out with that mindset, but actually very, very few people do that. Very few people actually believe that all Muslims are terrorists. But there are a lot of people who insist that no Muslims are terrorists. This is a lie. It's just an outright lie. Because if you are saying that no Muslim is a terrorist, the insinuation of that argument is that by extension, the terrorists must be atheists. That clearly makes no sense, given the track record of what they are saying and doing. I insist that Islamism is part of Islam. Islam is a major religion. So you cannot say that all Muslims are perfect. You just can't. You cannot on one breath say, do not, Islam is perfect but Muslims are flawed. Oh, by the way, no Muslim is a terrorist. Does that make sense? No. So if you acknowledge that Muslims are flawed because they're people, by extension, you have to acknowledge that there are terrorists out there who believe that they're acting in the name of Islam. I just do not accept that you can have this blanket term, oh, it's terrorism. And there is a certain cowardice in the West with simply being honest about the terminology. Too many of our leaders will not utter the words Islamist terror. Because I think there is this fear that they would then be tapping into far-right sentiments of generalizing all Muslims. But the point is, by being honest about the problem, far from pandering to bigoted generalizations of Muslims, you're simply being honest about the problem. If anything, that helps to defeat the narrative. Because if you're just using lazy blanket terms like terrorism, it doesn't address what the problem is. It simply doesn't. Because conventional terrorism, very often the terrorists would want a ransom or they'd want prisoner exchanges or that sort of thing. We're dealing with a sort of ideology here that is unprecedented. Islamist terrorism is unique in the way it goes about its sadistic actions. It is unique. And I've made this point many times. Every religion has its fanatics. And you can find examples of extremist Christians, extremist Jews, extremist Hindus, extremist Buddhists. But the threat from pan-Islamism is irrefutable. It's simply irrefutable. So if your response to these atrocities, if your first response is to come out with a Quranic verse and defend the image of Islam, you have your priorities wrong. If there was actually a problem of Muslims being attacked en masse in the West, in vigilante attacks, then I would understand the need to be so insistent about pushing this sort of, like, not all Muslims are terrorists. But whether there are individual incidents of hate crime, they're taken very seriously, as they should be. But we're facing an incredible situation where there is a very blatant problem and people are not being honest about it. They're still insisting that there is no religious ideology behind what is happening. It doesn't matter if some of these attackers have never been to a mosque or they're not good Muslim. They are being attracted to Islamist thinking. This is irrefutable. It's irrefutable. And it's a crazy situation where people who call themselves liberals, people who also say that they believe in human rights, and yet they're willing to say that there's no ideology behind this. And there's another aspect. When people say that they condemn terrorism, that's all very well. But frankly, a lot of those who say that they condemn terrorism, in some parts of the world, for example, Pakistan, people who will say that they condemn terrorism, in many cases, the very same people would try to condone stoning. This is a fact. So you will get people who saying they condemn ISIS, but by the same token, they would justify the assassination of Governor Salman Taseer. He was a Pakistani governor murdered because he defended the rights of minorities and he spoke out against the blasphemy law. There will be people who say that they condemn ISIS, but they try to condone severe interpretations of Sharia. That that is the sort of mentality that I'm talking about. There is a fundamental problem within Islam of violence and intolerance. Violent pan-Islamism is simply the personification of that. We're living in an intellectual wilderness. We're being honest about these problems. If your first response to hearing Islamist terror discussed people like me or in the media or whatever is to yell Islamophobia, you have your priorities wrong. I will always condemn individual attacks against Muslims minding their own business. So I will always condemn incidents where Muslim women are having their hijab ripped off or Muslim men minding their own business are attacked by thugs. I will always condemn that. But what we are facing is a situation of these callous, bloody attacks. And I'm talking about the situation in Europe, but needless to say, this has been going on for years in Nigeria, Iraq, Pakistan. The list goes on and on and on. And we are talking about thousands of people killed and maimed. And I really wish some of our leaders would have backbone on this issue. They may be good in other areas. They may have. There's policies I would agree with in other areas, but when they will not utter the words Islamist terror, that makes me furious, to be honest. It's just dishonesty. I understand the logic of isolating Islamists and, de-radicalization programs and all the rest of it. I understand that. But in order to address a problem, you have to be honest about the nature of the problem. And pretending that these attacks don't have any ideological basis is nonsense. Even many on the left are starting to acknowledge that this is ideologically based. But unfortunately, there's still too many people, there's still too many Muslims that are defensive about this, and there's still too many on the liberal left who simply won't acknowledge that it's a problem. This shouldn't even be about left and right, it should be about basic truth. Now I've put a status similar to what I've said in this video on my Facebook timeline, and already I'm anticipating people getting offended and thinking that I'm saying something that I'm not. If you've misunderstood this video, there's nothing I could do about that. But those who say that there is no ideological basis for what is happening, Dhaka, that was a glaring example. It just leaves me speechless, to be honest. That we are facing this crisis, and the response to the crisis is dishonesty. Putting up shutters, pretending that what's happening isn't happening. Because these people may not be interpreting Islam the way you feel it should be interpreted. They may have a mindset, a universe apart from your own, but they are ideologically focused. They are ideologically inspired. This is irrefutable.